I'm pleased that you're asking about this because we found many applications with this from this study in the clinical applications, or we found many clinical applications from this study in the cases that I've been dealing with since we had this presented for the coalition. And it's not.
Could you give the name of your coalition, please?
The Coalition Against Domestic and Community Violence of Greater Chattanooga Incorporated is the name of our organization. We have an education task force in our coalition that includes 15 agencies who go out into the community and teach healthy relationships, conflict resolution, what comprises a healthy relationship, and that sort of thing. And it corroborates in many ways what you found in your study. And it crosses, the thing that was impressive to me is it crosses ethnic backgrounds, and it very much corroborates the fact that domestic violence is a problem in all types of groups, all types of communities, and that we have to be aware of that it's there, no matter what your race, your sex, or anything else. It's going to be found.
Yeah, because
in the dating violence, we know that 1 in 4 students have been abused in their dating relationships, and that number seems to be increasing. We're seeing more and more teens who are involved in dating violence in our court system. So that study gives us great information directly from teens about why they end up in these relationships, how they're repeating the patterns that they saw in their own parents often. That often girls marry the fathers. I mean, they marry people who are like the fathers that they grew up with.
As you were talking, I was just thinking about the makeup of our study, and it's interesting how that with the makeup of the study, it shows that we dealt with ages from 11 to 21, and here from age 11 through 13, out of that we had 115 African Americans and 58 males and 57 females, and whites 42, and males 21, females 21, Hispanics, males 5, females 4. In all, we had 795 participants. And in those 795 participants, you're absolutely right that the makeup of it went, it didn't matter as we began to look at the data. Well, it didn't matter in the sense that certainly there are different things that are going to happen within socioeconomic groups, but with the 796 total study participants, out of that 485 were African Americans and 245 were males and 240 were females, and there were 220 whites with 115 males and 105 females, and then we had 91 Hispanics and 47 males and 44 females. So it seemed like what we were looking at was that we could still find commonalities regardless of the race. And can you speak to that?
The important thing is that it crosses all boundaries, even though there may be slight differences in the way abuse is done. It is just as common in the person in the upper socioeconomic levels as it is down in the projects where people are suffering from poverty, or no matter what your ethnic background is, it doesn't matter. It's just as common in the Caucasian and the Hispanic as it is in the African American. So it's not that is not a part of the picture. Many people have stereotypes that they believe that it happens just to poor women who live down in the projects. It doesn't happen in our wealthier population, but that is not true. It is not borne out in facts, and we found that out here locally when we look at where our calls to law enforcement come from. We notice that it comes just as often from the upper economic areas of town as it does from the from the inner city.
That's interesting. We are setting up family justice centers across our state in Tennessee, and certainly this is not anything new. That started.
Yes, this is a national phenomenon that
many years ago.
Several years ago, yes.
Because what we have tried to do is we tried to collect data and to be able to look at that data and see if there's any correlations between what is needed in a family justice center and what is needed in every arena, the educational arena, and see how we can maybe bring some resolutions to some of the issues that we're facing, truancy, issues with learning, behavior, violence, and all those kinds of elements that sort of play into even with domestic violence.
The study that you have done will be very practical and will have many clinical applications in the Family Justice Center movement. And I would strongly urge the people who are heading this movement in actually San Diego is where the National Family Justice Center Alliance is located, and the leaders out there are Casey Gwynn and Gail Strack. And certainly I would like for them to become aware of this study and encourage use of it in development of measurable outcomes in these centers, because we need to look at what works. The wonderful advantage that family justice centers have is to be able to turn around quickly what you're doing. If it isn't working, you can turn it around on a dime, and you can start doing something different because it's a small, intimate environment you're working in. And certainly we don't need to waste time doing things that don't work. So we need to use this study to substantiate the outcomes that we put so that we can measure the effectiveness of these centers and actually the effectiveness of the dollars that we're pouring into them.
Dr. Boatwright, as we were looking at this, we were looking at the impact and risk factors, the economic, the social demographics, the exposure to violence as a witness, as a victim, and as an abuser, and even looking at the gender-specific impact. And as we were looking at this, we were seeing that, yes, among those participants who came from the rather lower economic stratas, we noticed that there was dating violence, but we also saw that at the higher level, that there also was dating violence. And what's your take on that?
Well, we have a unique situation in our schools here in Chattanooga. We have some of the most prestigious private schools in the country, and we have people from wealthy families that come from all over the country to send their children to school here. And then we have some schools that have children who come primarily, from homes where poverty is an issue. And when we look at these, I go into these schools to talk about healthy relationships myself. And when I've been in either school, I ask how many people here have been a victim or know someone who's been a victim of dating violence. And without exception, every child in the room raises their hand. So it doesn't matter whether it's the private school or the public school. This phenomenon appears to be very similar in both these populations.
And this is exactly what we found. And we found that dating violence was more of a learned behavior, and it became acceptable.
All violence
yes.
is learned. No
Yes.
infant comes into this world knowing how to be violent. So it has to be learned, and normally it's learned in the family of origin. And when we start to do retrograde studies of perpetrators of abuse, we find that almost without exception, abusers have been abused as children. Often they have undealt with abuse that has occurred in their home, and usually it's by someone they trusted and loved. Often sexual abuse is involved. The nature of abuse is that it's physical, psychological, sexual, emotional, financial. It covers all of those areas. And children then, when they begin to mature, tend to emulate the same types of abuse that they've learned in their family of origin, or from people who are very close to them and that they love and trust.
I'm going to read just a couple statements here, and this is one that, because what we did in this study, we allowed them to tell their story, and one section we did was, what's up with that, with the dating violence. And it was very interesting, the kinds of stories that we got back. And I'm just going to read a couple to you. He would be like the perfect gentleman, and then all of a sudden he would be like a totally different person, like somebody else, somebody I don't even know, and somebody I don't even want to know.
And this is so typical of abusers, because what they're doing is using their behavior to control another person. And what the reason that the behavior changes rapidly is that because he suddenly found the need to use abusive behavior, controlling behavior, in order to get his way. And it's to control his victim, as a rule, his girlfriend, normally. And I say he or she. We are seeing, and I get this from our public schools, reporting from our public school principals, that we're seeing an increase in the numbers of young women who are attacking and violent with each other because of boyfriends. Very often it's over a boy.
Yes, yes.
So we're seeing increases in that kind of violence as well.
Let's read another one. If she would just fight back when I hit her, then maybe I would stop. But she won't. She just cries and makes me even madder. She needs to take up for herself, then maybe I would stop.
And this is typical of narcissistic thinking that abusers have. They tend to blame their violence, their own violence, on their partner. If you really want to make an abuser mad, you tell them that they are responsible for their own behavior. They do not want to take responsibility for what they do, or to be responsible for the violence that they are using on their partners.
And here's another one. Yeah, I beat my lady, 'cause she be provoking me and shit. I be telling her not to fuck with me no more, but she doesn't be doing no listening. Instead, she be like trying to make me hit her. I think she would be want me to hit her, so I give her what she wants. Excuse the profanity, but in this study we allowed the students to use the language of the streets in order for them to be honest and to be full participants without feeling that they had to fit into a certain mode in order to be truthful.
What this young man is saying, she refused to let me control her, and therefore she was asking for it. And we hear this. That is probably one of the most frequent type of comments that we hear from abusers. Sure, I hit her. She made me do it. It's all her fault. If she would just do what I told her, we wouldn't be having this problem. And this is what this young man is saying. She wouldn't do what I told her. She deserved it. And this is what the victim is told. You deserve to be treated this way. And often our young women are growing up to believe they deserve their abuse, and they're not worthy of being treated well. This requires that we educate our young women on about their own self-worth and about their own self-esteem, and how important that is, that they not be a reflection of what someone else thinks, but they always be worthy of their own self-esteem and their own self-respect, without having to, and not to tolerate lack of respect from other males. There's a national campaign called Give Respect right now that's going on for dating violence, to reduce dating violence in our country. And this is all about respect for yourself or others, and the fact that many of our young people are not being shown this in their role models, and they're not learning this in their family of origin.
Well, relating to what our children and youth have seen growing up, here's another one. I remember how my mother used to get beat on for almost nothing if she did not put enough salt in the food, or if she did not put my father's socks in the drawer the right way. It was like no matter what she did, it was never right or good enough for my dad. Finally, one day he beat her so bad because his coffee was not hot enough. And after that, we did not see my mother for almost 4 years. She was scared and was hiding from him. When we did see her, we were mad at her for leaving us with him because he took it out on us. But at least he did not kill us like he was trying to do my mother. Maybe that is the reason why now, every now and then, I lose it as a little girl and hit my little girl. I think it's because I got some of my father in me.
And children learn to use their parents as an excuse. You know, we have to have a certain level of maturity before we forgive our parents for having human elements about themselves, and before we learn that we don't have to be a mirror of what our parents were. It takes some growing up to get to a point where we don't do that. But what this young woman is saying is that she's carrying some anger toward her mother and toward her father for the abuse that she saw, that she witnessed in the home, and that it's still having impact on her.
This goes to the element of remorse. He beats me, then he turns around and lay in my arms and cry and asking for help, saying, "Can't somebody just help me?"
And this tells us that inside that abuser is a sort of a pathetic male very often, or the perpetrator who himself has poor self-esteem and is trying to fill that gap through controlling another person. He feels very badly. He has lowered self-respect and self-esteem, low self-confidence, and he's trying to bolster his self-esteem through controlling someone else. This person that she's describing is very different than most abusers, because most often they will say, "It's not me that has the problem, it's her." But he's actually recognizing that he has a problem. There's a lot of help for this young man.
And so you're saying that this young man probably can be helped?
He probably can, because he's actually amenable at this point in his life. If he could get help now while he's at this age, this is why what we're doing with our kids is so important. Because if he could get some help now while he's still young and amenable and able to learn new patterns, he can probably, yes, overcome his tendency to become abusive.
And there's one more that I'd like to share, and I guess this one goes to a place in me which mourns because it happened to have been one of the participants in the study. And she talks about that he seems to be mad all the time, and that one day she knows he's going to kill her. And unfortunately, this young lady was killed about 3 or 4 months ago.
Right.
And we both know what individual that was, and it brings a level of grief because we need to do something. And as we are embarking upon setting up juvenile justice centers and doing juvenile assessment, a part of this research is very important. And this is why Ms. Hill and I decided that we would do this, because we knew that it was necessary. We knew that it was important to keep confidentiality, so our kids in this study, their confidentiality is not revealed, and the only way that this individual who was murdered, her identity is revealed, is that the whole group had to vote whether or not we would, and they felt that it was in her best interest. I refused to release her identity, but they said no, if it helps her, then we need to speak out. And so we are certainly preserving the identity of the other youth participants. And I know I'm sounding a little whatever, because this hurts. It hurts from a very deep place, because in order for us to understand what's going on with our youth, we've got to listen to them.
Absolutely.
And that's been one of the missing elements. We've done all these studies. We have all of this data on how many of this are doing this and for what reasons, but we've never asked them why. And this study has really been a heart study for both Ms. Hill, and for myself, simply because we became a part of these kids' lives. They became a part of our lives. We became a family. And they were so open to telling their stories. And as we've worked on this study for 7 years, and like I said, self-financed it and got to a point now where we're trying to complete it, but it takes money to finish the completion of that study, and it will get done eventually. But every time I see something happen to our youth in the community, I feel so badly, because this study provides the information that is crucial to help to understand and to be able to find some workable solutions.
Well, this is why it's important that we get this study distributed and out there so that the results can be used to help us to know what we need to do to prevent. We have to put emphasis on prevention with our youth. And it's so important that we do this with youth. We're doing a lot of good things with the adults who engage in domestic violence. We've changed a lot of our court process. We've changed the way law enforcement approaches it. But we have not gotten to the point where we're willing to deal with the education, prevention, and early intervention in these cases, as would have been very effective, possibly in this case with this young woman. All the tools are there. We proved it here in Chattanooga when we had a domestic violence task force that went out and actually reduced the numbers of homicides. We were averaging 14 to 18 homicides a year in Hamilton County from domestic violence every year until we started our task force. The first year of operation, the number went to 2 because our law enforcement officers knew how to intervene. That's only one piece. That's only one piece of the systems. If our teachers knew, if our ministers knew, if our doctors knew, if all the people in the various systems in our communities knew about early prevention, early intervention and prevention, and what to look for, we could make a change in this. We could change this, and we could actually prevent homicides. As I've said before, this is probably the only preventable homicide, but it definitely is. We've proven it.
Well, Dr. Boatwright, I thank you so much, and I thank you so much for being able to be there as an expert on this subject, and as we've been gathering data, being able to go back and forth with you in terms of interpreting that data and taking a closer look at that, and even building some kind of network so that we can talk about this more freely and we can begin to address the issues directly that are impacting youth. I'm still a little choked up about this because every time I think about this young lady whose life was taken, I can't help but feel that had we had this information out there, that perhaps this would not have happened. But I thank you so much for the very fine job that you've been doing in the community, and you've spent just so much time and so many years investing in this. And once we began this study and we began to invest so much time and effort into it, we felt like that it was very, very important. And I appreciate the fact that you appreciate the work that we're doing. And hopefully we're going to be able to get this information to even Justice Department and see if they would be willing to complete the study in terms of getting this information out, and particularly to the justice centers across the nation, and also to anyone else who needs that information. It's any stakeholders in the community. And when you're dealing with youth, you have a multiplicity of stakeholders.
Absolutely.
Even stakeholders that you wouldn't even think
our
or consider.
Our educational system, our clergy need the benefit of this information so that they can feel effective in what they do and how they deal with youth. They're dealing with youth every day, and this would give them tools to be able to do a better job.
Well, on behalf of the 796 and now 795 participants that we had in the study, who have often said, Dr. Hill, we want our voice heard and we want our stories told, and eventually their stories will be told, and I'm very confident there's going to be some good that's going to come out of this. And again, thank you so much, Dr. Boatwright, and continue the work that you're doing out in the community, because it is making a difference.
We hope to be a voice for those who can't be heard.
Thank you.